Well, hello. My name is Duncan Berry. I'm with the Harwich Historical Society, and this is another installment in our series of discussions and lectures and interviews and programs about the history of Harwich and our rich heritage in culture, agriculture, aquaculture, maritime culture, architectural culture, social culture, economic, and the rest. And today we're featuring a well-known name about town, Alan Hall. Alan has graciously accepted my invitation to be interviewed and discuss his family's enterprise and history and legacy in North Harwich as a singular contributor to the cranberry culture on the Cape and nationwide. Alan, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I'm happy to contribute to the town and our history.
That's great. Well, you certainly do that in every day in every way. So those of you who are following Alan on social media, you can see the spectacular work that he does in promoting the family farm and kind of Harwich consciousness in general. So why don't we start with telling us a little bit about your family and family history and
Sure.
location and
Well, I grew up in North Howard on Depot Street. I still live on Depot Street. Most of all my family has been in that area since the mid 1600s. The Halls were the first settlers there, Gershom Hall. And so we follow our chain down through there, and they all concentrated in the area along the Heron River. And they landed there because of the Heron River, the water, and they made mills. Samuel Hall was the first one to have a water mill on the Heron River, right at the intersection, the apex now of Main Street and Queen Anne Road. And so they settled there and, acquired the land and lived off the land and developed it over time, over hundreds of years, and contributed in the town of Howard. And they've intertwined into several different families from the town of Howard because they had offsprings that married into the Riders, the Cahoons, the Eldridges, the Nickersons, the Chases. So it's quite a lineage of history that I come from, and I'm very proud of it in the town. And the town of Howard is great, and North Howard I think is spectacular. The industry of the cranberries, which we'll talk about, really came into Howard around the mid 1800s in the Pleasant Lake area. A gentleman named Alvin Cahoon was the first one to really get into the commercial part of the cranberry industry. The industry actually started by happen chance in Dennis. A distant cousin of mine, Henry Hall, Captain Henry Hall, was the first one to actually take the wild cranberry vines and cultivate them.
So there was no kind of early colonial or settler era, or even prior to that, native agricultural concern with the cranberry? Was it just kind of like an odd
It was a natural
species, or
It's one of the three natural fruits of North America: the Concord grape, the cranberry, and the blueberry,
Okay.
native to this continent on the earth. And the earlier settlers found it when they got here, but it was also used by the native Wampanoags and the native folks that lived here would use that cranberry fruit to help supplement their food base, and they would mix it with deer, venison, and I forgot the name of it, but there's an actual name of the recipe or the food that they created with the cranberries and the venison, the early native folks. So it's been around, it's been utilized, but it didn't come into real commercial development until Henry Hall found a way to cultivate it, because they were just naturally sitting in lowland areas. And the story is that he had a patch of wild vines over in North Dennis, and he observed some sand blowing off the sand dunes onto the vines. And he observed that the sand, once the vines were covered, in the spring, more vines would prop up through the sand and give more uprights. And then that upright would yield a bud the following year, which then developed into a fruit and gave a blossom in the cranberry. So by putting the sand on the natural vines, the runners, it would make the uprights shoot up through the sand, increase the volume of the uprights, which then increased the yields of the berries, and that's how they started the cultivation. So he just started doing that practice himself. Then other local folks saw what he was doing, and it just took off from there. And mainly it took off because the sea captains were putting it on their ships, the cranberries, because they
So it
had,
wasn't local demand then.
no, they were using it locally, I would assume, and then they were taking it and putting it on their ships because the vitamin C would fight scurvy and different
Right.
diseases at that time. So it was a supplement to have on the ship. So then as they started, going around the world, going into different ports, they were trading and people would ask, what is that fruit? What is that? So that's how it all started to develop into a larger scale. And primarily Alvin Cahoon in Howard was the first one to really take Henry Hall's observations, putting the sand, planting areas and lowland areas and marshes and swamps, replanting the vines and really cultivating it into a commercial status. So Howard has that history. It started right in Pleasant Lake area between Hinckley's Pond and Long Pond, and that's where the Cahoons were settled there. And then it just took off.
Is there a particular geological kind of substrate in that particular area that makes it unique compared to, let's say, because I know cranberries are cultivated out in the Midwest. Was it Wisconsin or something like
Wisconsin
that? Is there a comparable geography
Yes.
or climate or so?
They're basically on the same latitude and longitude of where we are. If you look across,
Right.
the same geological base of the Earth in that area of Wisconsin as it is here in Massachusetts along Cape Cod, and also Maine has it, New Jersey, Wisconsin, Oregon, and Washington.
Right. So
They
all the way
cultivate it.
across.
But in the Pleasant Lake area, you had all those ponds and all those low-lying areas and swamp areas, and so that's when they started utilizing those lands, because most of the other upland area was all, well, what was treed was already cut off for firewood and shipbuilding. And you look at some of the old photographs of Cape Cod and the Cape Cod 5 calendar. That's a good resource to look at. All the old postcards. You look in the foreground, there's no trees at all. Back in the 1900s, Cape
Right.
Cod was just a lot of fields and open spaces.
Right.
So then they started all the low-lying areas. They would build the cranberry bogs and drain them out. And
So is there like an irrigation factor of lowland that you could have easier access to the water table to? Was it pumped up or was
No.
it just simply?
Early on, they were in low-lying areas where the water sources either gravity fed through or they had rivers going through. If you look at the Heron River, there's an abundance of cranberry bogs from Hinckley's Pond south, all along the river's edge, all the way down was a whole chain of bogs that were built adjacent to the river. They're all grown up now and out of business, but that's why they did that, because the water source, as you said, it was close to the water table. So it was just a natural environment for the vines to live, because they didn't have irrigation back then.
Right.
So it was all natural flow. They built dams and dikes to hold back water and different things. But the cranberry vine itself is a wetland species. If you don't have water, it won't live.
Right.
It dies. So that's why they had it in a lower area. And that's why some of the bogs today are built in upland areas, because you have irrigation and you can alter that requirement of a wetland by having the irrigation pumped, so you create a wetland
Right.
environment.
So that must have been a big milestone to develop the irrigation technology. Are there other kind of technical milestones in the cultivation in terms of collecting or harvesting or seeding and plant? Like, what are the big kind of, historic events in the development of the industry?
Well, I guess, when you look at Alvin Cahoon, when he created the commercial industry, all the other families were paying attention to what was going on. So then the families all got involved, because it wasn't just building the bogs, then it was a harvest of the bogs. So the school children in the September and October, they wouldn't start school until November,
Right.
because they had to harvest the cranberries. So it was a huge economic and family tradition here in Howard and along the Cape. At one time, Howard and Cape Cod was the leading producer of cranberries. And then word got out, and they started going west to Middleborough, Plymouth, Wareham, Rochester, and then as far west as Wisconsin, New Jersey. So it just took off. And so the evolution through experiences and failure, they found the right way of growing cranberries. And wherever there was lowland, people just took advantage of it. They would cut the vines off of other producing bogs and transplant them. So recycling was enacted a long time ago. Everybody thinks we recycle now. Well, that's been going on for a long time.
Right.
And so that evolution, and then figuring out, the frost. There's so many natural enemies to a cranberry. You have a bowl of cranberries on your table at your home to enjoy and cook with, but you think about the whole year long of how it got there. So in the wintertime, you have to cover the bogs so that they don't get winter killed and frozen, so you cover them with water. So that was found out in the late 1800s that would help. And this was all developed through the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association.
Right.
They became an entity. I think it's the longest standing farming organization in the country.
Really?
I believe the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association is, and they had their first meeting, what is now the Sandwich Town Hall. And I don't know the date, but it was in the 1880s, 1890s that they had their first actual meeting of growers on the Cape. And at that meeting, they were developing the markets, they were developing education on how we fight this and what's your challenges in Howard and what's the challenges in Boren or Dennis. So that collaboration of all the growers together really set out all of those questions that they had early on of how do we fight winter kill, how do we fight bugs and worms and rot, and so they developed all those things. And then eventually the University of Massachusetts, the Cranberry Experiment Station was developed. And
Roughly, what was that?
I think around the 1920s,
20s, yeah, that sounds about right, yeah.
And there was Dr. Franklin Cross. He was one of the first entomologists, I believe, that worked there. And they really just focused in on the whole year-long growing of a cranberry to get to that bowl of cranberries on your table. And by fighting the winter kill, spring frost, then you have worms,
pests,
natural enemies, pests, and then just summer climates, the heat, how do you water them, pumps, irrigation, and then, longevity to keep the berries. What variety of vines are keeping well and what don't, because there's I believe there's over 100 and something varieties of cranberry vines. And so the primary cranberry vines that were early cultivated here in Howard was the early black. Mm-hmm. It was called early black, and that was because that cranberry would ripen early in September, and it was really dark black. So that was the name, early black cranberries, and Cahoon named that. And then you had the Howes, which is a later variety, which ripens mid-October, and they have good keeping quality, so they will last in a dry, cool area in storage without refrigeration, and they can last up to January or February. So they have a long shelf life. So they really focused in on all of those developments at the UMass Cranberry Experiment Station. And so, the variety was one thing. So you ask about the industry, all these developments, there's so many. I mean, I'm probably bouncing all over the place, but I'm trying to put all this together.
No, but this is great.
Well,
I'm loving it. So when you talk about that bowl of cranberry, what is like the loss in terms of, from your point of view, from like what you plant, what you harvest, and then what gets to the end user? Is there like a 10% loss because of, let's say, poor development or growth, or is it higher or low, or is it it depends on the season, or?
Well, yeah, there's so many factors.
A lot of variables.
So many.
Is there a rough estimate though? Like, do you have is it like annually you get less and less?
It's fair
loss?
to say 5 to 10%
5 to 10%, yeah.
When we clean out, we do water harvesting now, and when you clean out, you may lose 2 or 3% of that, because they can use a lot of the berries today through juice and they're not putting it on the shelf and keeping quality. They're automatically taking the berries from our farm in the truck, taken to a processing plant and processing them. Buy it juice, craisins, sauce. They're not keeping them on the shelf. Now, if you kept them on the shelf, you would lose difference because of the different varieties, depending on what you have. We have the hows, which have long-standing durability to last until January or February, but based on where you keep them. Or you can just throw them in the freezer
Right.
and keep them a year or two.
Right.
But there's so much to capture.
Right.
And try to explain that in 30 minutes on this show.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm trying to-
But it's like, this is great. This is a great overview. So let me ask you about this. So have there been developments in demand for cranberries, like different uses, different kind of applications, different? Has that been a factor that you've noticed in your time in the industry?
Well, in my time, I've seen the changes just from fresh fruit. That used to be the big thing, was dry harvesting fresh fruit.
Right.
They package them and put them in the store, and people would sell them for fresh fruit.
Right.
Then came along the juices. Then they mixed them with cran grape, cran apple,
Right,
cran
yeah.
raspberry. So that just took off. Then the sauce has always been there. Marcus Uran, who was the founder of Ocean Spray, was the one that really took the industry in the early 1900s and made the sauce.
Are you talking about the
The
canned
sauce.
gelatinous
Yeah.
cylinder that's carved perfectly? Right, exactly.
And it wiggles and
Yeah,
does all that
exactly.
stuff. But
That, for a lot of people, that is a primary kind of archetypal memory for Thanksgiving, that
That's-
particular extruded product.
turkey and cranberry sauce.
There you go.
So I should back up. So you had Alvin Cahoon and Howard, had the local families all working together, the Robins, the Moody's, the Eldridges, the Halls, the Chases, Wheelers. I mean, all these names are instrumental in the cranberry industry and Howard's history. And then they all had the bogs and they had their cranberries. Now, what are we going to do with them?
Right.
So they had to have a market. So they started marketing them all out. Then a gentleman named Marcus Uran, who was born in Maine, he was an attorney, got into the cranberry industry. And so he came down to Cape Cod, southeastern Mass, him and his brother, and they started to look around and see what was happening. This is the early 1900s. So then he got involved, and he started, I believe, United Cape Cod Cranberry Company. He was part owner of it, if not all the owner, because then there was other large growers involved. But he basically created the sauce and the canned cranberries because they needed to have expansion in the markets, because everybody's growing cranberries, everybody's being successful, but now we have a flooded market. What are we going to do with them? So that's when the cranberry sauce came along, and Marcus Uran really took that to a whole nother level. And as he got bigger, United Cape Cod Cranberry Company, he started coming to Cape Cod and buying up bogs, because now he needed cranberries to sell into his sauce. So if you start looking through deeds, you'll see United Cape Cod Cranberry Company, Ocean Spray Preserving Company. So they really started coming down to the Cape and buying up these bogs from these families, because the families were going through the same pains and struggles as we are today. What are we going to do with the bogs? You know, I'm getting older and my son doesn't want to do it, or this one doesn't want to do it, or I just can't feasibly do this anymore. So then this gentleman came along and started buying them up and working with the growers. So then they started working for him, and he put together this large company. And it got so large in Howard that he needed to have a receiving station, a plant. And that's when he built the Cranberry Screen House on Depot Street
Right.
in 1929. And it was called the Cranberry Screen House because all of the growers in the area, all around Cape, would bring their berries to that facility to be processed. They wouldn't be made into a menu or recipe. They were just being cleaned there. It was called the Screen House, and it was separation. And that's where they would clean the dirty berries, you know, the rotten berries from the good berries, and that was the
By the way, I'm a good berry.
yeah, you call the cranberry. Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
That was a good one. So they had that plant, and the railroad tracks was right there before the bicycle path, because people don't know this stuff.
Yeah.
So Old Colony Railroad was there, and they would ship the berries off Cape Cod and go to Boston, Chicago, New York, or wherever.
Didn't they have a big plant down in Buzzards Bay too?
Onset, yeah.
Onset, that's where it was,
Onset.
right.
Hanson, Wareham, and Cape Cod.
Right.
And then, so Mr. Uran, in my opinion, we have that Hall of Fame out there in the hallway. He should be recognized because for all the Howard folks at that time, he was a big savior
Right.
of a lot of people's economic challenges that they had. Because Cape Cod was poor.
Right.
I mean,
Always has been.
It always has been. I mean, now look at what's living here now. People have moved in with lots of money. But back in the day when it was agriculture, that's what he did. He was a savior to the town. And my grandfather would tell me all this stuff because my grandfather knew him.
Yeah.
And my grandfather knew of these experiences because he was part of it and his father was part of it. So I know this factual for that case. But it's remarkable if you just focus in. Like I said, we can't cover everything in 30
Right.
minutes. There's so many different decades of things that have happened. Going back to the screen house that he built in 1929, you talk about an invention in the industry. Just cleaning the cranberries from when you
Right.
pick them on the bog. First, they started by picking them by hand. All the women and children and men would be out there, and they'd be sectioned off with lines and strings to go on their hands and knees and pick, and they get paid for what they harvested. Then they got tired of just picking by hand, so then they developed a scoop,
Right.
which looked like fingers, if you look at a scoop,
Yep.
to go through the vines. Then they developed mechanical harvesters, which were mechanized, so you could stand behind it and walk behind it, and the machine would pick, which would save. So the labor has gone down through technology. But early on, when you were first harvesting, how do you clean those berries?
Right.
So they would have these large wooden boats, it looks like boats, that they would dump those berries into, and people would pick the berries on the bog, bring them ashore, and then sift through them by hand, and then push them into a barrel. And a barrel is a unit of measure for a
Right.
cranberry. That equaled 100 pounds. So when you hear people say, oh, I picked 1,000 barrels, they picked 10,000
1,000
pounds or 100,000 pounds of cranberries. That's the unit of measure, was a barrel. Because early on, that's what they would put them all in, the barrels, and then they put them on the ships. So that all evolved, and then how do you clean them? All by hand. But then by a happen chance, again by accident, a guy in New Jersey was putting some cranberries away upstairs in his loft, and apparently lost his balance. I believe he had a wooden leg on one leg. It was Peg Leg John, the story goes, that the berries in his box or barrel fell out of his hand, went down the set of stairs, and he observed that the good berries were bouncing and the rotten ones were just sitting on top on the stair treads. So he scratched his head and, ingenious, just put it together and developed a cranberry separator.
Right.
And it was all designed around the bounce. Good berry bounces, rotten one just goes plop. And you can hear that when you have a handful of berries on your table. You'll see them. They bounce because they're hollow inside.
Right.
So that's how they developed a large-scale cleaning mechanism, which then went into the large-scale processing plant that Uran built in North Howard, and that's what they had in there was a series of cranberry separators.
And you've got one of those early ones, don't you? Beautiful.
I've got all the evolutions of.
You've got the whole
from
City Work
1880
series.
all the way up through.
Wow.
The different
I mean, the
years.
first one, the one that you showed me, looks like a piece of furniture.
It's amazing.
Beautiful
Yeah.
piece of workmanship.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. There's so much to the cranberry industry. I mean, a cranberry grower is a cranberry grower, but he's also a carpenter, an engineer, a surveyor,
Meteorologist, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many things. You're a mixed bag of
Yeah.
all kinds of experiences. And so it's just fascinating to see the development.
So what do you face today that's difficult? Like we're talking about the challenges in the 20s and, the consolidation. So it looks as though, just from the surface, that there are very few players left in Harwich. I mean, it's kind of, is this like a macroeconomic thing, or is it demand, that there's lower demand, or are they we just don't do these big mega farms in the Cape, and so we can't, what's the deal?
Well,
what do you think the deal is?
Economics. Everybody loves Cape Cod. Everybody wants to be here.
Right.
It's a beautiful place. The word's out.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but everybody knows about Cape Cod now. So, yeah,
Quiet.
that's done. It's over.
Right.
And so I want to be here. You want to be here. Everybody. I mean, it's beautiful. Why not? So that pushed out farming industries, because then there's a lot of the bogs, a lot of the lands have large pieces and large parcels. And so early on, people were, I guess, approached by people to develop or sell, and they did. And you
Right.
can't blame them,
Right.
right? So, but through those challenges, what changed on the Cape, in my experiences, what I know, we had bad times in the cranberry industry. They had gluts, too many berries
Yep.
back in the 30s. World War One came along, the 30s came along, World War Two came along. Then there was a cancer scare in the cranberry industry in 1957, so that killed it. So there was already several depressions in the cranberry industry. So at those times, you know, my grandfather would tell me
A couple of farmers just wouldn't bounce, right?
yeah. Well, his father, my great grandfather, was Fred Eldridge from Dennis, and he was a building inspector in the town of Dennis. And at the time, people were buying up lands down on West Dennis Beach and building cottages and Chase's Ocean Grove and all that stuff. And my grandfather would tell him, "Well, we should buy some land down there." No, don't worry about it. The building boom is over.
Right.
That was after World War II.
Right.
So look what happened. And so that's the land became more valuable than agriculture, and that put it out. However, what's left, there are families that are left that are facing the same challenges. They don't have a next generation that's interested, or their next generation has interest in other technologies and other means and methods of making a living. So cranberries, it's hard work.
Right.
It's only as hard as you make it, though, because the technology has made it so much better than my grandfather time, through the advance of irrigation systems, automatic turn-on, shut-offs, temperature controls,
Right.
thermostat controls, just the whole thing about it. Mowing machines, you don't have to take a sigh and mow the bankers. Now we got a tractor with hydraulics and go around it. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot different. That's how we're doing it.
Right.
If I had to go out there and physically do it, I couldn't do it like they did back then.
Right.
So they learned along the way what worked and what didn't work. But the three depressions in the cranberry industry really changed Cape Cod.
Yeah.
The Cape Cod Hospital, next to the Cape Cod Hospital, there's 50, 60 acres of cranberry bogs that Abel D. Makepeace had right there on the water. They're all grown up, gone away. And I mean, there's bogs
Right.
in Orleans where the Stop and Shop is. That was a cranberry bog.
Right.
Dennisport, where Bradley's, well, it was Bradley's, now it's the Ocean State Job Lot, and what is now the Dollar Store, who used to be Stop and Shop. That was all cranberry bogs on that corner.
Huh.
So, and I got pictures of it, and that was owned by Harold Chase, and
Right.
the list goes on. And so things changed. And then wetland laws came along.
Right.
Back in the 50s, 60s, you could fill in wetland areas. Then that all changed. So,
It's a different game now.
yeah.
Much
So
different
so
game.
the challenges for me is just trying to keep it going. And I have a passion for it. I'm seventh generation from Howard's doing it in the cranberries, and my son's eighth, Benjamin and Nicholas, and they're right there with me because they've grown up in it just like I did. And so, how can you sit at the kitchen table and myself, my grandfather here, my father there, and then me and my other two brothers would sit there eating Cheerios, and all you hear is, well, Burley Atkins did this and this bog, and then, all these different names about bogs, which
Right.
is another whole subject, just the name of the bogs. So the logistics, the locations, and how can you not be fascinated
Yeah.
by listening to, well, this frost night, this pump house, the pump broke, the flat belt came off, and this and that, and we lost this, but I mean, as a kid,
Yeah.
it was just fascinating.
Yeah.
Then you get in the truck and drive with them to these bogs, and you'd see these old pump houses with these big engines inside with these large flat belt pulleys that would run into a big lift pump, and just the mechanical engineering, the Yankee ingenuity.
Right.
It's
Well,
not
that's the
that-
family thing too. I mean, this is huge. I mean, you guys have been on the land that so long. Let's before we get too far, I wanted to go back and I wanted to ask you a little bit about the North Harwich connection, because I've got old family. I've got 12 generations here too, and the second generation in, I know one of my eighth great grandfathers settled right up there in that northern part of the Herring River, and That was kind of like the industrial area of, I guess it was like hay, and there were some salt farms up there, and I guess the herring industry is like it's always been, and then it's just kind of like dissipated, I guess, prior to World War One. Are you familiar with some of this history? I mean, because your family's
Oh
been up
yeah.
there. I mean,
Well, the Heron Run, the Bell's Neck area, that
right,
was all owned, all put together by Marcus Huron. He built the West Reservoir in
right,
1929. It was called the
right,
Agawam Power and Reservoir Company. It's recorded in Barnstable. And he backed up that, what we know of now, the Heron Ladder. And he backed up that water for the bogs there, so they would gravity feed,
okay,
so he could have the supply of water. And then it also, all the way up the Heron River, with all the dams and dikes they had along the way, all the way to the Heron Hinckley's Pond. That's why they built the reservoir. It was primarily for the cranberry industry. But before that, there was a heron industry there.
right,
So they had seines and different things, and they always had it. And it was
right.
always there, and it's because of the natural resources of the Heron River. And so it created jobs and income. The salt works. I don't know much about that other than the fact that they were all out there in the salt marshes behind, well, where the weather deck is now, looking across towards, there was Hall's Island and
Right.
Pine Island and all those islands out there. But
Because I know my grandfather, his story was that he could make a good money as like a 10-year-old packing herring for like a dime. What was it, like dime a barrel or something like that? And a barrel, like as you were saying, you're saying it's 100 pounds. In terms of merchant marine, a barrel was essentially a ton. So like a 10-ton or 40-ton schooner would take 40 barrels. So, a heavy duty barrel, that's a lot of work for a dime, but the melt value, the monetary value of a dime was pretty good for a kid, you know.
absolutely.
So it was good work, and they all, like you were saying, they all worked in, pitched in, and
It was different times,
different
Duncan,
time.
I tell you.
Yep.
Now you got OSHA rules and regulations and laws.
Yep.
So all the different things. It's just the evolution of time, how people have adapted to
Right.
what was there and what was different. But the population changed. The Earth is,
Right.
its population's grown.
Right.
So everything has changed as
Yep.
that comes along. If I just think back of North Howard, of all the things I know, there was a post office. There was two post offices in North Howard. It was country stores. There was a train depot. They had the Ocean Spray cranberry plant.
Yep.
You had all the heron fisheries along the Heron Run north of Great Western Road and south of Main Street. And so there was a heron fishery there, and that's where they would pack them in the barrels and bring them to the depot, the train depot right on Depot Street. I mean, so, I always kind of live my life backwards in the old time because it's so interesting.
Right.
It's so fascinating to know, how did they do all that?
Yeah.
We think we're pretty cool people. Look what we can do with our iPhone.
Right. But pull the plug.
Look, yeah. Or charge
Where
it
are
up.
you?
Why isn't it charged? They had to do everything. They had stagecoach, horse and buggies, the advancement of an automobile. I mean, just look how much the Cape has changed. There was dirt roads.
Yeah.
You didn't have pavement roads. You had dirt roads. I mean, it's fascinating to think about all of those things and respect it. But it's just the
But we need to have another conversation about North Harwich, because I want to drill into each of the histories of each of the villages. So promise to come back and we'll have continue this conversation and like dial it back even further in time.
Yeah,
It's fun to do that. I think it's we drive by this stuff at 40 miles an hour. We don't even see the fact that there was a vibrant, rich life being led there, and these strands, it's these very thin threads of continuity that we got to be careful about holding on to them. So,
And one other thing about the cranberry industry. My grandfather told me, although there was depressions, there was also good times.
Right.
And during the good times, if they had the technology of today with the bulldozers, the Cape would have been one big bog.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I mean, so that tells you how far along it went.
Well, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun. We'll do it again. I can't wait. Always good to see you. Thanks so
nice
much.
To see you. Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And you'll see us at our next interview or lecture or event. Thank you.
38 minutes.
Is that good?
perfecto.
Good. That was great. That was awesome. I want to do it again.
Well, there's so much to cover.
I know. Well,
I don't know. You know,
I think you were like
I didn't mean to
skipping
bounce around a little bit.
No, this is perfect. It's like
How
we were
did I do?